and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi P743 USB power source. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, starting off at the bottom of the tool, we have the battery slot, which will accept any of Ryobi's 18-volt batteries. Overall, there's not really much wiggling or jiggling, and I don't think you're going to have to worry about accidentally dropping the battery as long as the battery inverter has been seated properly, which is a little bit tricky sometimes. This battery inverter has a nasty habit of not seating properly if you apply any sort of pressure towards the rear of the battery inverter, and quite frankly, this can be a little bit of a pain sometimes if you're in a hurry. As long as you're careful when you're seating the battery inverter onto the battery, it will seat just fine. I've noticed that if you put pressure towards the front, or if you just put pressure straight down without any sort of pressure towards the rear of the tool, it will seat every single time. So it's not really that big of an issue, it's just something that you need to be aware of. But other than that, it works just fine, and it fits on securely to the battery, so it still gets a pass. Okay, moving upward, we have the body of the tool, or the grip. Overall, the body of the tool is made out of a smooth plastic, and overall, it's very easy to drop because of how slippery it is. I personally would have liked to have seen some rubberized texture somewhere on this particular tool, but we didn't get that, and so that is a little bit of a disappointment. But overall, it's really not that big of a deal breaker since it's meant to be used in a stationary position. And if you do need to carry it, I would carry it by the battery and not by the tool itself, simply because of how slippery it is. But at the end of the day, this does not affect the performance of the tool, and it still does a good job when it comes to providing power to USB devices that don't need PD delivery. And so I think this is still an acceptable performance, so it still gets a pass. Okay, next up we have the USB ports. Now the USB ports are located on the right side of the tool in a vertical positioning, one on top of the other. And the bottom port is a 5 volt 1 amp port, and the one on top of that one is a 5 volt 2.1 amp port. Overall, this is a fairly standard voltage for this particular sort of a tool, and I don't really have any major complaints, although I personally would have liked to have maybe seen 2 of the 2.1 amp ports. But at the end of the day, this really isn't that big of a deal breaker because this still works great for charging a phone and running a light or fan simultaneously. So I am happy with just the overall performance when it comes to the USB ports. They both seem fairly strong and rigid, and I don't think you're going to have to worry about them becoming disconnected from the board inside the tool. So at the end of the day, I think this is an acceptable performance, and I'm perfectly satisfied. So moving on. Okay, next up we have the power button. The power button is located at the top of the tool, and it is a decent feeling little button. It's a little bit on the small side, but that's fine because that means there's less of a chance you'll accidentally bump it. And it has a nice rubberized texture, which definitely feels better than a cheap USB converter for power tool batteries, which usually has some sort of a hard plastic button. So quite frankly, I'm perfectly happy with the overall performance of the button. You press it once to turn it on, and then you press it again to turn it off. And it will run up to 8 hours before it auto turns off because of the built-in safety function, which you cannot disable, which could be a downside for some people or positive for some people. For me personally, I don't really care that much for this particular function, simply because sometimes I like being able to run a fan or something for longer than 8 hours with a larger capacity battery. So I do find this to be a little bit of an annoying function. Now, I will say that this particular USB power source is great for when you need to recharge a battery-operated flashlight, Bluetooth speaker, your phone, run a portable fan. You get the idea. Lots of small different gadgets that are USB powered are going to be what this thing runs, and it does a good job running all those little USB devices. So quite frankly, this is still a very useful little tool to have around in a variety of different situations. Okay, let's go over the pros and cons. USBs is the first pro. Yeah, I know that's what this whole tool is about, but the fact that they actually did give you a 2.1 amp port is a nice feature. I've noticed on several other battery inverter or converter sorts of power sources in the past that they have a nasty habit of only giving you 1 amp USBs, and I really think this is a disappointment. Would have been better if to had 2 of the 2.1 amp ports, yes, but at least we got one, so I would still consider this to be a pro. And next up we have lightweight. Overall, this is a very lightweight little battery USB power source, and I really do appreciate that, and it's easy to throw in a bag or something for easy transportation. And next up we have useful. There are so many different uses for a USB power source, and this will come in handy in all different kinds of situations, everything from camping to emergency situations to just for running devices out in that shed or workshop that doesn't have a power source. So quite frankly, this is a very useful little gadget. I would recommend it simply because of how useful it is. And the first con is the price. Coming in at $21, this is definitely too expensive. This really needs to be priced closer to the $10 mark, and I wouldn't really recommend buying it at that price. If you can find it on sale over at Tool Direct and you're going to be placing a larger order, that's not a bad way of going, but other than that, I would just wait and see if it comes down in price, or see if there's any specials that are going on, because sometimes it does end up in specials. And next up we have slippery. This is a very slippery tool to hold by the body. I really wouldn't recommend holding it by the body of the tool. I'd recommend holding it by the battery, and I don't think you'll have any issues there. It would have been nice to have some rubberized texture on the body of the tool, but we didn't get that, so this is a con in my opinion. And last but not least, no indicator light. This is probably the biggest con. There's no indicator light letting you know when the tool is on or how much battery is remaining in the battery. Now, if your battery has a indicator light on it, it's not really that big of a deal, but if you're using an older battery that doesn't have an indicator light, this is definitely going to be a little bit of a pain. So at the end of the day, this is definitely what I would consider to be the biggest con on this particular list. So yeah. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this USB power source. Overall, this USB power source will come in handy in a variety of different situations. Everything from camping to emergencies to just everyday use. It comes in handy for running fans, for charging speakers or USB flashlights, or running USB lights. Overall, this is definitely a useful little tool to have on hand, as long as you have multiple Ryobi batteries. If you only have one or two Ryobi batteries, I would probably say this isn't worth getting. But if you have quite a few of the Ryobi 18-volt batteries, I definitely think this is a worthwhile tool to have on hand, and this does come recommended as long as you don't care about the price. So yeah. And that is it for this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. God bless.